The sparring grounds outside West City had seen plenty of impossible things. Rocks that floated, energy blasts that carved new valleys into hillsides, a Saiyan prince hovering 40 feet off the ground, arms crossed, radiating enough power to make the air itself nervous. These were Tuesday mornings for the Z-Fighters, and nobody in the surrounding area even bothered filing noise complaints anymore. The Dragon Balls had been used enough times that death had lost its paperwork, and the end of the world had been postponed so many times that Bulma kept a crisis pantry stocked with instant ramen and emergency champagne. So when Goku suggested they use the flatlands east of Capsule Corporation for a light warm-up session, nobody thought much of it. Light, Vegeta had said flatly, cracking his knuckles. You said light. I mean mostly light, Goku clarified, already bouncing on his heels, his orange gi catching the morning sun. No final flash until after lunch. The air smelled like dry grass and distant rain. A hawk circled lazily overhead. Krillin sat on a boulder at the edge of the clearing with a thermos of coffee, under strict instructions from Android 18 to observe only, and under no circumstances take a hit that would require her to explain another hospital bill to Marin. Piccolo stood at the tree line with his arms folded, watching the two Saiyans square off with the expression of a man who had long ago accepted that his retirement plans were permanently canceled. The first exchange lasted 4 seconds and left a crater the size of a city block. The second exchange rearranged the local geography. By the third, Goku was grinning so wide it looked structural, and Vegeta was doing the thing where his eyebrow twitched in a way that meant he was genuinely trying. Not training trying, actually trying. The kind of trying that happened when Kakarot did something that reminded Vegeta, against his every instinct, that this idiot farm boy was genuinely fun to fight. They were in the middle of a blinding exchange of Kai-enhanced strikes, each impact sending out visible pressure waves that rolled across the flatlands like invisible tsunamis. When it happened, the sky cracked. Not metaphorically, not a storm rolling in or a dramatic cloud formation. The sky above the sparring grounds developed a visible fracture, a jagged line of wrong light splitting the blue from east to west like someone had taken a knife to a painting. The color behind it was not black, not space, not anything that belonged to this universe. It was the bruised purple-white of something tearing that was never meant to tear, dimensional membranes separating realities that had no business touching each other suddenly failing at the seam. Goku stopped mid-strike. Vegeta stopped mid-counter. Krillin spilled his coffee. The fracture widened for exactly 3 seconds, edges crackling with discharged energy that smelled like ozone and something else, something burnt and metallic and old. Then, through the gap, something fell. Not floated, not descended, fell, like a meteor with opinions. The impact hit half a second before the sound did. The ground did not just shake, it disagreed with itself. A shockwave rolled outward from the point of impact with enough force to knock Krillin clean off his boulder, flatten a quarter-mile of scrub grass in every direction, and send a pressure wave rolling toward West City that would later be registered by 17 different monitoring stations as a localized seismic event of unusual character. The crater it left was roughly 50 meters across and 12 meters deep, with a glass-smooth floor where the heat of impact had fused the topsoil into something resembling pottery. At the center of the crater, something moved. Goku was there in an instant transmission, dropping him to the crater's edge before the dust had settled. His hand went to his face out of habit, reading Kai the way he always did when something new showed up, expecting the familiar signature of a fighter or a threat, or occasionally both. What he got instead made him tilt his head like a dog hearing a new word. Kai was there. He could feel it, but it was wrong in a way he didn't have vocabulary for yet. It wasn't suppressed like a trained fighter holding back. It wasn't hidden like Frieza used to do. It was layered, stacked on itself in a way that made no structural sense, like two separate power signatures fighting each other for control of the same body, one cool and contained and deeply frightened, the other vast and hot and furious in a way that felt almost geological, like pressure beneath a volcano. Like the specific kind of anger that comes not from cruelty, but from a wound that never healed. The dust settled. The figure in the crater stood 7 feet tall and was the color of a forest in summer. Massive didn't cover it. The word massive implied a comparison to something normal, and there was nothing in the frame of reference of this clearing that served as a useful baseline. Shoulders like architectural features, arms that could have been load-bearing walls, hands that could have palmed a car and probably had. Wearing the remnants of what had once been purple pants, now shredded to the knee and apparently made of something more durable than physics had any right to allow. The face was where it got complicated, because despite everything, despite the size and the green skin and the raw physical presence that made the air feel crowded just by existing, the face was not the face of something feral. It was the face of something that was trying very hard not to be as angry as it was. The jaw was set. The green eyes were scanning. The brow was furrowed with something that looked, in a universe that had seen a lot of expressions on a lot of powerful beings, remarkably like exhausted intelligence. The Hulk looked at the crater around him. He looked at the foreign sky. He looked at the 2 men standing at the crater's edge, one in an orange gi radiating cheerful curiosity, one in blue and white with an expression of absolute imperious assessment. "Hulk," the green giant said, in a voice that operated in frequencies that Krillin felt in his back teeth from 100 meters away, not in Kansas. Vegeta's scouter, the spare he kept in his capsule for old time's sake and occasional ironic use, crackled on his wrist. Then it made a sound like a small animal in distress. Then it showed a reading. Then it stopped working entirely. "Interesting," Vegeta said, in a tone that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite making it. Goku dropped into the crater without hesitation, landing with the easy grace of someone who had jumped into craters his whole life and found the experience generally rewarding. He landed 10 meters from the Hulk, hands open, posture relaxed. Head tilted with the particular brand of Goku-specific fearlessness that was genuinely impossible to distinguish from ignorance, and was in fact something far more complicated than either. "Hey," Goku said. The Hulk stared at him. "You okay?" Goku asked. This was, in retrospect, exactly the right question and exactly the wrong one. Wrong because no, empirically, the Hulk was not okay. He had just been torn through dimensional space by a gamma radiation cascade event triggered when a Stark Industries experimental portal array had malfunctioned during a containment test in New Jersey, and the specific flavor of not okay he was currently experiencing included disorientation, residual fury from the transport, and the particular existential vertigo of realizing that the sky above him had too many stars in the wrong places, and the gravity felt slightly different under his feet. Right, because it was the first thing anyone had said to him in a very long time that was a genuine question rather than a threat assessment. The Hulk's eyes narrowed. His hands, which had been slowly curling into fists from the residual impact anger, paused. "Where," the Hulk said carefully, each word placed like a foot on uncertain ground, "is this place?" "Earth," Goku said helpfully. "Our Earth. Might be a different one from yours though, you kind of fell through a hole in the sky so." He paused. "I'm Goku." The Hulk looked at this small, smiling man in the orange pajamas, who was standing 10 meters away from a being that had once punched a hole through the helicarrier, and had faced down the Silver Surfer without blinking, and who showed no sign of threat, fear, or anything, except what appeared to be genuine friendly curiosity. Something in the layered Kai signature shifted slightly, not calmer exactly, but less immediately explosive. "Hulk," the Hulk said. "Cool name," Goku said sincerely. Vegeta from the crater's edge made a sound. It was a small sound, barely audible, but Piccolo, who had moved to stand beside him without either of them acknowledging it, recognized it. It was the sound Vegeta made when something had appeared that he didn't have a category for and was already mentally designing tests to create one. The scouter crackled again, showing a number that couldn't be right, going dark, rebooting, showing a different number that also couldn't be right, then displaying a sequence of error codes that had never appeared before in the history of scouter manufacture on planet Vegeta. "His power level keeps changing," Vegeta said quietly. "I noticed," Piccolo said. "Not fluctuating, not suppressed, changing, as if it's not a fixed value." "I noticed that too." "That," Vegeta said, with the careful deliberateness of someone filling in a crossword square they were only 70% sure about, "should not be possible." In the crater below, Goku was asking the Hulk if he was hungry, because Kai had made extra rice that morning and Goku had been told multiple times that he needed to stop eating it all before noon. The Hulk stared at him for a long moment. Hulk could eat, the Hulk admitted. And that was how it started. It did not stay simple for long. Bulma had been notified within 30 seconds of impact by her seismic monitors, and she arrived via hover capsule 7 minutes later with a scanning array that she'd originally designed to analyze Beerus's energy signature from a safe distance, and had since adapted for general anomaly detection. She circled the crater twice before landing, squinting through the canopy window at the figure standing in the middle of it. "Okay," she said, landing and stepping out with the energy of a scientist who had stopped being surprised by impossible things, but retained the capacity to be aggressively interested in them. "Okay, that's a large green man. Goku, why is there a large green man?" "He fell through a hole in the sky," Goku said. "Of course he did." Bulma pulled out her scanner. "Hi, I'm Bulma, don't break anything." The Hulk looked at the small blue-haired woman who had just arrived in a flying vehicle and addressed him like a neighbor's dog that had gotten into the garden. The Hulk said, which in context was relatively diplomatic. Bulma pointed the scanner. The scanner returned a reading. Bulma looked at the reading. The reading made her look at the scanner. She shook the scanner, which was a habit she'd acknowledged was scientifically meaningless but emotionally useful. The scanner returned the same reading. "His cellular density is wrong," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Not wrong bad, just wrong different, like the base physics of his biology came from somewhere with different fundamental constants." She looked up. "Where are you from?" "Different world," the Hulk said. "Banner's world." "Banner." A pause. The vast green face did something complicated. "Banner is Hulk. Hulk is Banner, both. Same, it is." The Hulk paused again, searching for the word with the patience of someone who used language carefully because it had once been used carelessly against him. Complicated. I understand complicated, Bulma said, and her voice had shifted slightly, losing some of its clinical efficiency and gaining something more careful. She'd heard that particular kind of complicated before. She'd watched a prince learn to carry it. We'll figure it out. That was when the Galactic Patrol ship entered the atmosphere. It came in fast from the north, a sleek enforcement vessel with the GP insignia on its hull, descending with the urgency of an organization that had been alerted to an unclassified dimensional breach and was operating on protocols designed for exactly this category of incident. The hailing frequency opened before they'd finished decelerating. Attention, unidentified entity. You are in violation of Galactic Patrol Dimensional Incursion, Statute 7 through 12. Please submit for classification and containment assessment. The Hulk looked at the ship. The ship looked at the Hulk. Hulk, the Hulk said, in the tone of someone who had heard variants of this announcement from SHIELD, the military, the Avengers, various alien races, and at least 2 separate iterations of the Illuminati, does not submit. The containment beam fired. It was a Class 4 restraint field, rated to hold beings up to a power threshold that encompassed roughly 98% of all known life in this galaxy. It hit the Hulk squarely in the chest and began its compression cycle. The Hulk looked down at it. The Hulk grabbed it with both hands and pulled. The Class 4 restraint field, which had once held a rampaging Saganbo for 11 minutes, lasted approximately 4 seconds before the Hulk tore it apart like cotton candy. The feedback surge shot back up the beam to the emitter array on the patrol ship, and every sensor aboard suddenly had a very bad day. Silence. Recalibrating. The ship's AI said, somewhat helplessly. Vegeta, watching from the crater's edge, felt something he very rarely felt anymore. It wasn't fear. Vegeta had done a great deal of work, much of it painful and most of it involving multiple near-death experiences, to move past fear as a primary operating mode. What he felt was closer to the particular sensation of standing at the base of a mountain and looking up and not being able to see the top. And underneath that, because Vegeta was Vegeta, and some things never changed, a spike of something that was absolutely not excitement and he would deny under any interrogation. Kakarot, he said. Yeah, Goku called up from the crater. We are going to need, Vegeta said carefully, a bigger sparring ground. Above them, on the edge of space where no instrument should have been able to detect what had just happened, in a divine realm that operated outside of normal cause and effect, a pair of ancient cat-like ears twitched. Lord Beerus, god of destruction of Universe 7, opened one eye. Then the other. He sat up slowly from his nap on the deck of Whis' staff ship, fur standing slightly on end. The unconscious divine sense that had kept the universe in its current shape for millions of years, suddenly paying very close attention to a single point on a small blue planet that had always produced more surprises per square kilometer than anywhere else in his jurisdiction. Wise, Beerus said. My lord. Whis appeared beside him, staff in hand, expression at its customary pleasant neutral. Something interesting just arrived. So I noticed, Whis said, and the small smile that crossed his face was the specific smile of someone who had already done the math and found the answer delightful. Beerus settled back against his cushion. He didn't move toward Earth. Not yet. That was not how a god of destruction operated. You watched first. You assessed. You let the situation develop until you understood what you were looking at. But he stayed awake. That alone said more than anything else. In the crater below, Goku was explaining to the Hulk that no, the Galactic Patrol wasn't going to try the beam thing again. They were just doing scans now. It would be fine. And the Hulk, who had absorbed this information and was watching the ship with the steady, measuring gaze of a being that had learned very young that the universe was full of people who pointed things at you and called it help, was doing something that required more effort than breaking the containment beam had. He was choosing to wait and see. 100 meters away, sitting on the grass with his recovered thermos, Krillin watched the green giant standing in the smoking crater and talking to Goku, and felt the particular instinct that had kept him alive through more extinction-level events than any human had any right to survive. This was not a monster. He didn't know how he knew. He'd been wrong before. He'd been catastrophically wrong before, in ways that required Dragon Balls to correct. But the look on that enormous green face, underneath the wariness and the residual fury and the sheer impossible physical presence, was the look of someone who was very tired of being treated like a weapon. Krillin knew that look. He'd seen it in different forms on Vegeta and on Android 18, and once, in a quiet moment after a very bad battle, on Piccolo's face when he thought no one was watching. He refilled his thermos from the capsule and walked toward the crater. If you want to see more unstoppable forces crash into immovable universes, hit that subscribe button and drop what character you want to see in the Dragon Ball universe next in the comments below. This is only getting started. The kitchen at Capsule Corporation had seen things. It had fed a Saiyan prince through 3 separate redemption arcs and a wedding. It had hosted post-battle meals where the caloric consumption required industrial resupply. It had once been the site of a negotiation between Bulma and a god of destruction that hinged entirely on the quality of the pudding. It was a kitchen that understood its role in the larger cosmic drama playing out around it and had made peace with that role, which was essentially to be large, well-stocked, and structurally reinforced. Even so, it had never fed the Hulk before. The first tray lasted 45 seconds. It had contained enough food to cater a moderate wedding reception, assembled by Bulma's catering capsules in a flat panic, while she simultaneously ran 3 different analysis programs on the scanned data from the crater. The Hulk looked at it, then looked at Goku, then looked at the tray again with the expression of someone who had learned through long experience to eat when food was available, because availability was not guaranteed. He ate it in the way that mountains, given sufficient geological time, eat rivers, completely and without apparent effort. More? Goku asked hopefully, because Goku experienced other people's hunger as a personal challenge, and the idea of someone out-eating him was producing a specific competitive joy in his chest that Kai would have described as deeply concerning. More, the Hulk confirmed. Krillin, sitting across the table with his 3rd coffee of the morning, was watching the Hulk eat with the careful attention of someone cataloging data. Not scientific data, human data. The kind you collected by watching how someone held their shoulders when they thought no one was looking, how their jaw unclenched incrementally in the presence of food and the absence of immediate threat, how the eyes that had been scanning every exit and every face since arrival were starting, very slowly, to scan with curiosity instead of calculation. So, Krillin said, in the conversational tone he'd spent decades developing for exactly these situations. Different world. How different are we talking? The Hulk set down what had been a serving bowl large enough to bathe a toddler. Different sky, Different stars. A pause. Different fighters. Yeah, you notice Goku and Vegeta going at it, huh? The green eyes moved to where Goku was enthusiastically requesting a third round of rice from the automated dispensary. Small, fast. The Hulk's brow furrowed thoughtfully. Strong. That's one word for it, Krillin said. The small, loud one. The Hulk's chin indicated Vegeta, who was standing near the window with his arms crossed, performing the specific behavior pattern of a man who was absolutely not watching the green intruder eat and was simply standing near the window for unrelated reasons. Stronger than he looks. Don't tell him that, his head's already a problem, Krillin said, and something happened on the Hulk's face that took a moment to identify because it arrived and departed so quickly. It was the compressed leading edge of a smile, gone before it fully formed, but there. Krillin noted it the way an experienced tracker notes a footprint. Bulma appeared in the kitchen doorway with a tablet and the expression of someone who had been doing math that kept giving her interesting answers. Okay, so, your biology is carbon-based, which is something, but the gamma radiation that structures your cellular activity doesn't match any frequency on our spectrum. It's like you're running on a different channel. She pulled up a holographic display from the tablet, rotating a cellular diagram. Normally, that would mean your powers shouldn't work here. Except they clearly do, which means either you're generating your own gamma field or... Banner generates, the Hulk said, with the patience of someone who had sat across from more scientists than most scientists had ever met. Hulk maintains. Banner, you keep saying that. That's you, but also not you. The Hulk was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a Capsule Corp drone was recording the seismic damage assessment from the crater. And somewhere in the city, a news cycle was beginning that Bulma had already taken steps to manage with the particular efficiency of a woman who had been controlling the narrative around impossible events since she was 16. Banner is the man, the Hulk said finally. Hulk is the strength. For a long time they were at war. Now, he considered the word, now it is more complicated and less. Bulma stared at him. Then she put down her tablet and sat at the table and looked at the Hulk the way she looked at problems that required full attention rather than multitasking. How long did it take to stop being at war? The Hulk looked at her. This woman who had arrived in a flying vehicle and told him not to break anything and had not, at any point, reached for a weapon or a restraint or anything except a scanner and a chair. Long time, the Hulk said. Yeah, Bulma said quietly, I believe that. Goku reappeared with enough rice to address a minor famine and the energy of someone who had just made a decision that he found entirely satisfying. He sat down across from the Hulk and began eating with competitive dedication, and then, between bites, started talking. This was Goku's primary diplomatic method. It had a mixed track record strategically, and an almost perfect track record humanly, which was why it kept being used. He talked about the crater, and whether the Hulk thought they'd done that together or separately, because from the blast pattern it looked like the dimensional tier had interacted with the Kai signatures already present, and he was wondering if that meant they'd accidentally pulled the Hulk in, or if the Hulk had been on his way regardless. He talked about the food, specifically which dishes he recommended and which ones Vegeta had once eaten 14 of before a training session, and then refused to acknowledge. He talked about Earth, their Earth, and the way it kept attracting the universe's attention whether it wanted to or not. He did not talk about threat assessments or containment procedures, or what the Hulk's arrival meant for global security. He talked to the Hulk the way he talked to everyone, like they were already someone worth talking to and the conversation was just the formality of confirming it. The Hulk ate and listened, and slowly, so slowly it was almost geological, began to talk back. By the time the second hour had passed, they had established the following. The Hulk had come from a world with different heroes and different wars, and a version of Earth that had made different mistakes in different orders. He had been fighting something when the portal had taken him. A remnant of a gamma-based creature that one of the other scientists had released in what the Hulk described with exhausted brevity as another bad plan. He did not know if the portal was two-way. He did not know if he wanted it to be, and the complexity of that uncertainty sat in his voice like a stone in a river, worn smooth by long acquaintance. He did not mention Bruce Banner again except once, when Goku asked if Banner was in there right now, and the Hulk said yes, quiet and watching, and Goku nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world, because to Goku it was. He had spent years carrying something inside him that was both himself and more than himself, that had needed to be integrated rather than suppressed, and the specific topography of that experience was one he recognized even in entirely different geography. "He can come out if he wants," Goku said. "Nobody here is going to freak out." "Banner," the Hulk said carefully, "is not ready." "Okay," Goku said, "no rush." Vegeta had entered the kitchen by this point, ostensibly for tea, and was sitting at the far end of the table with his cup and his crossed arms and his careful neutral expression that wasn't fooling anyone in the room except possibly himself. He had been running the scouter analysis in his head since the crater, building a model of what he was dealing with the way he had always processed new power signatures, methodically, thoroughly, and with the specific focused attention of a man whose survival had historically depended on being right about these assessments. The scouter had broken 3 times. He'd moved to manual Kai sensing. That had given him numbers that conflicted with each other in ways that made structural sense once you understood the principle, but that understanding had only arrived in the last 20 minutes. The Hulk's power wasn't a single value. It was a function, a variable that responded to input. The angrier the Hulk got, the higher the output, and the ceiling on that function appeared from the Kai signature analysis to be either very high or non-existent. And Vegeta was a man who could do mathematics in his head under battlefield conditions, and those two options were not the same option, and the distinction mattered enormously. He was also, underneath all of that, aware of something else, something that he would not have admitted under any circumstances, and that was nevertheless true. The Hulk reminded him of something, not a person, a state, the specific experience of being a power that people feared and managed and tried to weaponize rather than understand, the experience of being strong in a way that made everyone around you reach for controls rather than conversation. Vegeta had been that. He had done enormous amounts of extremely painful work to become something else. The work wasn't finished and probably never would be, but the direction was clear. He looked at the green giant across the table who was telling Goku about a fight with something called the Abomination, with the careful specificity of a fighter analyzing a past performance, and he drank his tea. The first attempt to complicate things arrived at noon. It came in the form of a Galactic Patrol official named Maris, standing in for the absent Jocko, who materialized in the Capsule Corporation lobby with the expression of someone who had been given a difficult assignment and was going to execute it professionally regardless of personal feelings. He had with him a tablet showing 3 separate dimensional incursion forms, a preliminary classification template with 17 blank fields where the Hulk's data had simply refused to populate correctly, and a set of standard containment protocols that he was already privately certain were not going to be relevant. The Galactic Patrol requires the unclassified entity to submit to formal assessment and temporary custody, pending species identification and threat evaluation, Maris said, with the tone of someone reading from a document they knew was optimistic. The Hulk, who had finished eating and was now sitting in the Capsule Corporation main lab, while Bulma ran non-invasive scans, turned his head slowly toward Maris. "No," the Hulk said. "I understand this may seem." "Hulk has been in custody," the Hulk said. His voice had not risen. It had done something that was in some ways more concerning, which was become very flat and very clear in the way that pressure becomes flat and clear in the specific moment before it becomes something else. Many times, by many people, always the same, always bad plan, Hulk will not go. Maris looked at Bulma. "Don't look at me," Bulma said, not looking up from her scanner. "I've read the force readings from the crater. Whatever form that containment attempt takes, I'm going to need you to do it outside." Maris looked at Goku. Goku scratched the back of his head. I think he should get to decide, right? He hasn't done anything wrong, he just got here. The dimensional incursion statutes don't require." "The dimensional incursion statutes," Vegeta said from the doorway, and his voice had the particular quality it got when he was exercising patience at significant personal cost, "were written for entities that can be meaningfully detained. File your forms. Come back when you have forms that are actually applicable." Maris looked at all of them, looked at the Hulk, and did the specific calculation that any competent professional does when they find themselves holding a policy document in front of a reality that the document's authors had not anticipated. He lowered the tablet. "I will file a preliminary report," he said carefully, nodding that the entity is in the custody of named Earth defenders pending formal classification. "That works," Bulma said. The second attempt came 2 hours later, from a different direction. Dr. Jiro's former research network, which had been officially disbanded, but existed in the way that things officially disbanded by people who built evil robots tended to exist, had automated monitoring systems that flagged unusual energy signatures in the West City area. Those systems had flagged the Hulk's arrival within minutes of the crater forming, and the data had cascaded through 2 intermediary networks before landing in a server cluster that still, despite everything, sent its priority reports to a secondary address that belonged to someone who had survived by being very good at surviving. The address was checked once a day. It had been checked that morning. The report had been read with interest. No direct action was taken yet. Observation first. But the observation had begun, and it had already noted several things. The entity was green, enormous, and had torn apart a Class 4 Galactic Patrol restraint beam with its hands. The entity's power reading was variable and apparently anger-responsive. The entity was currently in the company of Goku and Vegeta and Bulma Brief, and was eating rice. The report had flagged this as Priority 1 and included a subnote, Potential Acquisition Asset. The flag had not been sent to the Galactic Patrol or to any of the Z-Fighters. It had been sent, through several carefully maintained layers of deniability, to a contact in the Planet Trade Organization's remnant network. A contact who reported to Frieza. Back in the Capsule Corporation lab, Bulma had moved past frustration with her scanner and into the specific productive zone, where frustration becomes creativity. She'd abandoned the standard energy models and was now working with a framework she'd originally developed to analyze Kai interactions in multi-universe tournament conditions, overlaying it with the gamma radiation data from the Hulk's cellular scans. "Okay," she said, more to herself than anyone. "So Kai in this universe operates on a kind of biological emotional feedback loop. You generate it through training and it responds to mental state but within defined parameters. What you're doing is different. Your power generation doesn't have defined parameters. It has a trigger and a direction and theoretically no ceiling." "Theoretically," the Hulk said. "I haven't found one," Bulma said. "That might mean it doesn't exist. It might mean I need better instruments." She looked up. "Has anyone ever found your ceiling?" The Hulk was quiet for a moment that stretched longer than a simple no would have required. "Once," he said, "not found by making Hulk weaker, found by making Hulk." He paused. The word he was looking for was in a space between vocabulary and memory. "Quiet, inside." His expression shifted slightly. "Banner calls it the Worldbreaker threshold, where it is not just anger anymore, where it is something older." The room was quiet. Goku was very still in the way he got still when something landed exactly in the center of a concept he'd been developing for years but hadn't finished yet. Piccolo, who had been standing in the lab doorway for the past hour saying nothing, spoke for the first time. "That's not a power level," Piccolo said. "That's a state of being." The Hulk looked at the tall green man with the white cape and the weighted turban, and the expression of someone who had been thinking carefully for a long time. "Yes," the Hulk said. Something passed between them in that word. Two green beings who had started as something else and become what they were through processes that could not be fully captured in any scan or any power reading. Who understood, without needing to discuss it, the specific experience of being a transformation that the world found easier to fear than to know. Piccolo unfolded his arms and walked into the lab and sat down, which was the highest form of acceptance he routinely offered anyone. Outside, the sun was beginning its afternoon descent. The crater to the east had already attracted a news drone that Bulma had redirected with a targeted signal scrambler. The galactic patrol ship was holding a high-orbit observation pattern. Somewhere in the planet's upper atmosphere, an unmarked scout drone with Planet Trade Organization coding was beginning a slow circumnavigation. And in a desert realm that existed outside of normal physics, beside a lake of some substance that was not water, a purple cat with golden earrings was sitting very still with his eyes open, and his ancient divine senses extended toward one small blue planet that had once again decided to be the most interesting place in the universe. "Wise," Beerus said, without looking away from the middle distance. "My lord." The green one, a pause. "His anger is not like Broly's. Broly's anger was a fire. This one's anger is..." Beerus searched for the word with the unhurried precision of a being who had seen anger in most of its possible forms across 4 billion years. "Pressurized." "Yes," Wise said. "Contained fury rather than unleashed fury. The distinction is significant." "It means there's more of it," Beerus said. "Considerably more," Wise agreed. Beerus picked up a small fruit from the bowl beside him and bit into it thoughtfully. "I want," Beerus said, "to see what makes him angry." Wise smiled his small, warm, genuinely alarming smile. "I suspected you might." In the Capsule Corporation lab, Goku stretched and stood up and looked at the Hulk with the expression that every person who had ever trained with him had learned to recognize with a mixture of anticipation and resignation. It was the expression that meant he had been thinking about something since it happened, and had finished thinking about it. and had arrived at a conclusion that everyone else was going to experience whether they'd signed up for it or not. "Hey," Goku said, "you want to spar?" The Hulk looked at him. Krillin from the hallway closed his eyes briefly and smiled into his coffee. And somewhere deep inside the vast green frame, in the quiet interior space that Bruce Banner occupied when the Hulk was forward and steady, a man who had spent a lifetime being the most dangerous person in every room he entered felt something shift in his chest. Something that felt, cautiously and against considerable prior experience, like the early edges of belonging somewhere. The sparring ground Bulma designated was 40 kilometers east of West City. She had chosen it for 3 reasons. First, it was far enough from the city that collateral damage could be managed. Second, it was close enough to the Capsule Corporation sensor array that she could run live data collection on whatever was about to happen. Third, and most practically, it was already a wasteland from a previous training incident involving Vegeta and a particularly ambitious final flash that he had never formally acknowledged, so the environmental guilt was pre-distributed. She set up her monitoring station on a reinforced ridge overlooking the flat expanse and pulled up 6 simultaneous data feeds. Krillin sat beside her with a fresh thermos and the philosophical acceptance of a man who had learned to treat ringside seats at impossible events as one of life's reliable pleasures. Piccolo stood further along the ridge, arms folded, watching with the quality of attention he reserved for things that were going to matter later. Vegeta stood at the edge of the ridge with his arms crossed and his expression performing neutrality and not quite finishing the job. Below, Goku and the Hulk stood roughly 30 meters apart in the flat dust, and the air between them had the specific quality of air between 2 people who are both, in their different ways, genuinely delighted about what is about to happen. "Rules," the Hulk said. It was not a question. It was an acknowledgement that rules existed and a request to know what they were before deciding how much to care about them. "Don't kill each other," Goku said cheerfully. "Everything else is fine." The Hulk considered this rule set. It was, by a significant margin, the most permissive set of sparring rules he had ever been offered. Every previous fight in his life had come with an extensive list of things he was supposed to not do, and a longer list of things other people were going to do to him to try to make him do them anyway. This man was simply standing in a flat space and offering him a fight with one condition. "Acceptable," the Hulk said. Goku's grin hit full deployment. He came in at half speed, which in absolute terms was still fast enough that most instruments would have recorded it as teleportation. The punch he threw was calibrated, exploratory, the kind of opening strike a fighter uses not to damage but to learn. It landed on the Hulk's forearm where he'd raised it in a block, and the impact sent a visible shockwave rolling outward across the dust in a perfect circle. The Hulk didn't move. Goku felt the impact travel back up his arm and through his shoulder and learned several things simultaneously. The density was unlike anything he'd felt before. Not Kyrian-forced flesh, which had a specific quality he could identify the way a musician identifies a key. This was something else. The cellular structure itself was the armor. The resistance was not a technique being applied. It was a state of being that existed at rest. He flickered back 20 meters before the Hulk's counterswing arrived, and the displaced air from the near miss flattened the ground where he'd been standing. "Oh," Goku said, with the reverence of a man receiving a gift. "Oh, that's interesting." The Hulk pulled his swing back and recalibrated. He'd expected the small man to take the hit, not because he'd underestimated him, but because, in his experience, Things that were fast were usually trading the hit for the speed, accepting damage in exchange for mobility. This one had moved cleanly, no desperation in it, just the easy repositioning of someone for whom that speed was a resting state rather than an effort. He was fast in the way the Hulk was strong, fundamentally, not performed. They went again. The next 3 minutes produced data that made Bulma's instruments deliver readings she had to verify twice. Goku was operating at roughly 30%, feeling out the parameters, and even at 30% the exchange was generating impact events that registered on her seismic array. The Hulk was doing something she hadn't expected from the initial scan data. He was fighting smart, not just throwing power at the problem. Timing his swings for Goku's repositioning patterns, varying his approach, using his size and mass not as a blunt instrument but as a lever, trying to create situations where Goku's speed became a liability rather than an asset. He was a tactician. Underneath everything, behind the green and the size and the geological anger, was a mind that understood how fights worked. His combat IQ is extraordinary, Piccolo said quietly from the ridge. Banner was a physicist, Krillin said, and the Hulk's been fighting his whole life. That's a combination. It's not just that. Piccolo's eyes tracked the exchange below. He's analyzing in real time. Every exchange he adjusts. He's not reacting, he's learning. Below, Goku threw a Kai blast, low power testing. The Hulk took it on his chest and staggered one step back, and Bulma watched his cellular reading spike in real time. The gamma radiation output from his skin increased 17% in the 2 seconds following the impact. The energy hadn't damaged him. It had fed back into the system. His body had taken the Kai energy and processed it as another form of input, another log on the fire. Bulma, she said to herself, in the specific tone she used when data produced an implication she needed to say aloud to make it real. He gets stronger from being hit. What? Krillin said. Not just angry. His cellular structure actually incorporates external energy impacts and converts them. It's an adaptive response at the biological level. She looked at her screen. Every hit Goku lands is making him incrementally more durable, not by a lot, but consistently. Krillin looked at her. She looked at Krillin. Yeah, Krillin said. Vegeta, who had exceptional hearing and had caught every word, did not change his expression. But his jaw shifted in a way that meant he was running numbers, and the numbers were producing answers he was filing carefully away. Below, the spar ended not with a decisive exchange but with mutual acknowledgement. Goku dropped out of stance and laughed, and the Hulk straightened from his fighting posture and looked at Goku with the evaluating expression of someone updating a significant number of estimates simultaneously. They stood in the dust, and the displaced air settled around them, and the seismic monitors slowly stopped registering. You're holding back, the Hulk said, not accusing, observing. Yeah, Goku admitted, you too. A pause. Yes, the Hulk said. How much? Goku asked, with the specific genuine curiosity of a fighter who treats this question as the most interesting one in any conversation. The Hulk was quiet for a moment, then almost carefully, depends on how angry Hulk gets. And right now. The Hulk looked at the flat expanse of destroyed ground around them, the casual destruction that had resulted from two people not trying, and something moved behind his eyes that was part calculation and part something older. Right now, the Hulk said, Hulk is calm. Goku processed this, looked at the crater field around them, looked back at the Hulk. I really want to see not calm, Goku said. No, the Hulk said with a weight that closed the subject. You don't. The political complications arrived before they got back to the city. Bulma's communicator went off twice on the ridge. The first call was from King Kai, relayed from the other world, flagging an unusual interdimensional energy reading associated with the Hulk's arrival and requesting information for the cosmic registry. The second call was from Kai, who had seen the news drone footage of the crater and wanted to know if Goku was responsible, and if so, whether he had considered that the neighbors had property values. The third contact was not a call, it was a visitor. He was waiting at the edge of the designated sparring zone when they descended from the ridge, a slight figure in a suit that cost more than most space vessels, with silver hair and eyes that had been doing extremely expensive calculations since before anyone present had been born. His hands were clasped behind his back. His expression was the specific expression of a man who had learned to make interest look like boredom as a professional discipline. Mr. Brief, the Hulk said, because the name was on the badge of the building they'd spent the last 6 hours in. I'm not Mr. Brief, the man said pleasantly. I'm someone who works with Mr. Brief's organization on matters of strategic interest. My name is Carmine. I represent a coalition of universal commerce partners who have been monitoring this sector for dimensional anomalies. A pause calibrated to seem casual. We're prepared to offer significant resources in exchange for cooperation with a brief series of assessments. Bulma's expression did not change, which was how she expressed maximum suspicion. What kind of assessments? Goku asked. Standard dimensional traveler protocol, Carmen said smoothly. Energy output measurement, biological sampling, capacity evaluation, all non-invasive, all consensual, all very well compensated. His eyes moved to the Hulk with the specific quality of eyes that were trying to look at something as an asset and making a reasonable effort not to show it. Your unique biology would be of considerable scientific interest to our partners. Biological sampling, the Hulk said. Non-invasive as I. People have said that before, the Hulk said. His voice was still level, still controlled. But the air around him had changed in a way that Goku's Kai sense registered as a drop in temperature registers on skin. Something had shifted in the layered power signature. The cool contained layer was still present, but the deeper layer, the hot geological one, had moved slightly closer to the surface. Always means needles, always means a room with no windows, always means, he stopped. No. I understand your hesitation. Hulk said no, Piccolo said, from behind the Hulk. His voice had the quality it got when a conversation was over. Carmine looked at Piccolo, then at Vegeta, then at the general arrangement of people around the Hulk, and performed the calculation any professional does when the room's composition makes the next move obvious. He smiled with the practiced warmth of someone for whom warmth was a tool. Of course, he said, the offer stands. Please do reach out if you reconsider. He produced a card, set it on a nearby rock, and left with the unhurried pace of someone who had not lost anything, only deferred it. Vegeta picked up the card. He looked at it for a long moment. This organization doesn't exist, he said flatly. The address is a relay node. The communication frequency on the header is a planet trade remnant band. He dropped the card. Someone is fishing. Bulma already had her communicator out. I'll trace the relay. Give me an hour. She didn't need the hour. She needed 40 minutes, and what she found at the end of the trace made her sit very still for 30 seconds before she said anything. Then she said, "We have a Frieza problem." The briefing happened in the Capsule Corporation strategy room, which Bulma had installed after the third time, A global threat had required them to coordinate a response from her living room with everyone sitting on the floor. It had screens and a central table and chairs that were specifically reinforced for Saiyans who sat in them while charged with Kai, which had been a necessary retrofit. The Hulk sat at the table and listened to the briefing with the focused attention of someone who had been in enough rooms like this to know that the information being delivered mattered. Frieza had been monitoring the sector. Frieza's network had flagged the Hulk's arrival within the first hour. Frieza's operative had made first contact under a false identity. The pattern was textbook Planet Trade Acquisition Protocol, updated for the post-resurrection era, which meant it was more sophisticated than it used to be and considerably more patient. "He won't move directly," Vegeta said. "Not yet. He'll assess, build a complete picture of capabilities, look for leverage points." His jaw tightened. "He is very good at leverage points." "What does he want with Hulk?" Goku asked. "What he wants with everything that's powerful enough to matter," Vegeta said. "To own it, to aim it, to add it to his collection of things that exist to extend his reach." He looked at the Hulk across the table. "You're not a person to him. You're an asset to be acquired or a threat to be eliminated. Nothing in between." The Hulk absorbed this without visible reaction. He had known people like that. He had known entire institutions like that. He had spent years being that specific category of problem for people who thought in those terms. And he had the specific kind of tiredness that comes from a long war with something that simply regenerates its resources and tries again in a different configuration. "Then Hulk will be a problem for him," the Hulk said. It was not bravado. It was a statement of historical record. "It's not that simple," Vegeta said, and his voice had something in it that was not quite what anyone would have predicted from Vegeta. It was close to the specific kind of honesty that costs something to deliver. "Frieza doesn't fight problems directly. He builds situations. He creates conditions where the problem becomes isolated or compromised, or where the people around the problem make choices they wouldn't otherwise make." A pause. "He is patient. And he understands exactly which pressure points produce which outcomes." The room was quiet. The Hulk looked at Vegeta with an expression that was doing something complicated around the eyes. He was recognizing something. Not the tactics, exactly. The experience of being described. The specific weight of being told by someone who had been in the machinery how the machinery operated. "You know him," the Hulk said. Vegeta held the Hulk's gaze for a moment. "I served him," Vegeta said, with the flat, precise delivery of someone who has said a true thing many times and has not made peace with it, but has made functionality with it. "For a long time, before I understood what that meant." The silence that followed had texture. Goku looked at the table. Krillin looked at the wall. Piccolo, who knew this particular history in its full weight, kept his eyes on the Hulk. The Hulk was looking at Vegeta in the way that people who have carried things look at other people who are carrying things. Not with sympathy, exactly, with recognition. "Then you know," the Hulk said quietly, "what it is like to be used as a weapon." Vegeta's chin lifted fractionally. "Yes." "And to spend long time becoming something else." A pause that lasted exactly long enough. "Yes." The Hulk nodded. Once, slowly, the way agreements are made between people who do not have the habit of easy agreement. Bulma, watching this exchange from the head of the table, felt the specific emotion she experienced when the universe decided to be unexpectedly, almost unbearably efficient at putting the right people in the same room. She let the moment settle, then pulled up the tactical display. Okay, she said briskly, because someone had to be brisk or they'd be here feeling things for another hour. Here's what we know. Frieza has at minimum one embedded agent on planet. He has the scan data from Carmen's visit, which is limited but enough to tell him the containment approach isn't viable. He'll be building a secondary strategy. She looked around the table. We have a window before he acts. The question is what we do with it. We don't hide, the Hulk said immediately. Nobody said. Hulk has been hidden. The flat certainty in his voice was not aggression, it was information. Hidden places become cages. Hulk does not go back in cages. Fine, Bulma said. No hiding, so we need a plan that works in the open. Goku was already grinning, because for Goku, plans that worked in the open were the only category of plan that had ever felt right. We train, Goku said simply. That's not a plan, Piccolo said. It's the start of one, Goku said and looked at the Hulk. If Frieza is going to come eventually, we want to know what you can actually do. And you want to know what we can actually do. And right now we've had one sparring session and we've both been careful. He shrugged with the easy confidence of a man whose plans had an embarrassing success rate for things that should not work. Stop being careful. The Hulk looked at Goku, then at the table, then slowly at the assembled faces of people who had not reached for a weapon or a restraint or a classified form in the last 8 hours, who had fed him and briefed him and argued honestly in front of him, and were now asking him to train with them rather than be tested by them. Banner, quiet and watching in the deep interior, felt something that neither of them had the vocabulary for yet, but that both of them recognized. Hulk agrees, the Hulk said. Outside the Capsule Corporation windows, in the high atmosphere above West City, a small drone with no identifying markings completed its circumnavigation, compiled its data package, and fired a tight beam transmission toward a receiver positioned at the outer edge of the solar system. The transmission reached its destination in 11 minutes. 11 minutes and 30 seconds later, on a ship that existed in a sector of space that did not appear on galactic patrol charts, a small golden figure set down a wine glass and folded his hands. Frieza's face, in repose, showed nothing. This was a practiced nothing, the cultivated blankness of someone who had learned that the display of interest was a form of expenditure. But his tail moved, just slightly, the specific unconscious movement it made when he was engaged. Anger-based power amplification, Frieza said softly to his aide. No documented upper threshold, currently operating at suppressed capacity. He picked up the wine glass again, and he has befriended Goku. The aide waited. Every weapon has a trigger, Frieza said. The trigger for this one is not a button or a frequency. He took a sip. It's an emotion, a pause. The right emotion applied correctly at the right moment, in the right situation. He set the glass down. Find me the banner half psychological profile, everything available. My lord, the aide said and withdrew. Frieza looked at the data screen for a long moment. The tail moved again. So much potential, he said almost gently, being wasted on friendship. The training began the next morning and lasted 4 days. Not 4 days of structured sessions with scheduled breaks and recovery periods. 4 days of the specific continuous escalation that happened when you put Goku in proximity to someone whose power ceiling he couldn't locate and gave them both a reason to push. It was the kind of training that left geographical evidence, the kind that made Bulma's seismic array file automated complaint reports to itself, the kind that Krillin watched from a safe ridge with his thermos and a folding chair, and the expression of a man attending a natural wonder that he had no intention of getting closer to. Day 1 established baselines. Goku went a Super Saiyan in the first hour, which caused the Hulk to plant his feet and lean into the increased output, with the focused intentionality of a wall deciding to be more of a wall. The golden aura and the power spike that came with the transformation produced a visible reaction in the Hulk's biology that Bulma's instruments captured in real time. The gamma output from his cellular structure increased in direct proportion to the Chi pressure being applied against him. Not dramatically. Not the explosive surge that came from anger. A steady, adaptive climb, the biological equivalent of weight training, the body finding new capacity because the demand for it existed. He was getting stronger in real time, just by standing in the pressure field of a Super Saiyan. Goku felt it happening and responded the way Goku always responded to that kind of development, which was with uncomplicated joy. "You're feeding off my Chi," Goku said, during a brief pause where they were both recalibrating. He didn't say it as a problem. He said it the way a scientist says a finding that opens 3 new questions. "Not feeding," the Hulk said, breathing steadily despite the exchange that had just occurred. "Adapting." "What's the difference?" The Hulk considered. "Feeding means taking, adapting means becoming." Goku was quiet for a moment with that distinction, turning it over. "Yeah," he said finally, "that's actually really different." Vegeta watched Day 1 from a distance and said nothing. He ran his own analysis, cross-referencing the scouter data he'd been collecting with the Chi sense readings and the pattern of the Hulk's fighting style across multiple exchanges. By the end of the first day, he had a model that was approximately 70% complete, which was the threshold at which Vegeta considered direct participation professionally justifiable rather than merely personally desired. He came down from the ridge on Day 2. He didn't announce it. He didn't ask. He landed in the flat expanse between Goku and the Hulk with the specific energy of a man who had decided something and was executing the decision without unnecessary ceremony. "My turn," Vegeta said. The Hulk looked at him, then at Goku, then back at Vegeta. "Okay," the Hulk said. What followed was different from the Goku sessions in ways that mattered. Goku fought with joy, with exploration, with the quality of a person for whom combat was a form of conversation. Vegeta fought with intent, not cruelty, not the cold, controlled brutality of his earlier years, but the specific focused intention of a fighter who had spent decades transforming personal damage into technical excellence. He attacked the Hulk's patterns rather than his body, looking for the rhythmic tells that governed the Hulk's timing, the slight weight shift that preceded the big swings, the defensive adjustment that happened when something moved faster than his tracking. He found several. He also discovered, at the end of the second exchange, that finding the tells and being able to exploit them were different problems when the target responded to being hit by hitting harder. Vegeta took a hit on Day 2 that sent him 40 meters through a rock formation and left him recalibrating for 3 minutes while the dust settled. He came back. He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. The Hulk watched him return and said nothing, and they went again, and the rock formation became a memory. And by the end of the session, Vegeta had closed the exploitation gap considerably, because Vegeta was exactly the kind of fighter who treated being hit as data rather than defeat. That evening, sitting on the ridge while Bulma reviewed the day's recordings, Vegeta said something that surprised everyone within earshot except Piccolo, who had expected it roughly 6 hours earlier. His durability is not defensive, Vegeta said. It's generative. Every impact above a threshold level triggers a cellular reinforcement response. He does not tank hits, he metabolizes them. I know, Bulma said. My instruments have been showing. The implication, Vegeta continued over her, in the tone he used when he needed to finish a thought before it outran him, is that conventional escalation doesn't work against him. Hitting him harder makes him harder to hit harder. You cannot win a damage race against something that converts damage into defense. He paused. The only vectors that might bypass this are speed, energy-type mismatch, or psychological disruption. Silence. Psychological disruption, Krillin said carefully. The banner component, Vegeta said. The power is anger-based. Anger is an emotion. Emotions have triggers and they have ceilings. Uncontrolled anger eventually collapses into something that is not anger, which is why Broly was ultimately less than what his power level suggested. He looked at the Hulk's distant figure, standing at the edge of the crater field in the evening light. But Banner is not Broly. The integration is different, more sophisticated. Which means the psychological disruption vector requires understanding the specific architecture of that integration, not simply finding what makes him angry. Finding what makes him afraid, Piccolo said quietly. Everyone looked at him. Anger is the response, Piccolo said. Fear is the source. That's true for Banner specifically, and it's true for the Hulk as a system. The power escalates with anger, but the anger escalates with fear. If you want to understand the ceiling, you need to understand what's underneath it. Another silence. The Hulk was still visible at the crater's edge, a green silhouette against the evening sky, and nobody at the ridge said what they were all thinking, which was that this analysis, accurate as it was also the exact analysis that Frieza would arrive at given sufficient time and data. Day 3 brought the first real test. It didn't come from training. It came at 3 in the morning, announced by a perimeter alert from Bulma's sensor array, and the specific quality of silence that arrives when something that has been making noise stops, which is somehow louder than the noise was. The Hulk was awake when the alert fired. He had been awake for most of the night, sitting outside the Capsule Corporation facility in the compound's eastern garden, which had been left intentionally wild in the way that only people with enough space to afford wildness leave gardens. He sat with the particular stillness of someone who was not resting, but was not fighting either, occupying the middle space that was the closest he got to peace. Banner had been closer to the surface tonight. Not forward, not speaking, but present in a way that the Hulk had learned to read. A specific quality of interior attention that meant the man was thinking about something that required the kind of thinking that the Hulk's ongoing presence made difficult. The alert fired. The Hulk was on his feet before the sound fully registered. 3 of them came over the eastern wall. Not Frieza's soldiers, not yet. This was not the main event. These were scouts, professionals, equipped with high-grade capture technology that represented a significant investment, which meant whoever had sent them was serious and had done homework. One carried a neural disruption device rated for Class 5 energy beings. One carried a restraint net made of a material that Bulma would later identify as a kinol composite, designed to suppress energy-based powers. One carried a scanner that was running a live feed to somewhere else, which meant this was an assessment operation as much as a capture attempt. They were good at their jobs. They moved well, they had solid tactical positioning, and they had clearly studied the facility layout in advance. They had not adequately studied who they were trying to capture. The Hulk cleared the distance in 2 bounds, and the operational integrity of the 3-person team lasted approximately 8 seconds before it became an archaeological record. The neural disruption device fired and hit the Hulk squarely in the chest, and did something that its designers had not anticipated, which was nothing. The Kinol net deployed and wrapped around the Hulk's left arm and began its suppression cycle, and the Hulk looked at it, and then he flexed, and the Kinol composite material discovered that it had been designed with a specific set of assumptions about what it was likely to encounter that did not include the Hulk's cellular density, and it became a memory. The scanner was still running its live feed when Goku appeared beside the Hulk in a flash of instant transmission, hair gold, having felt the Kai disruption from inside, and arrived at the conclusion that warranted Super Saiyan before he'd finished waking up. The 3 scouts, who were professionals and had done real work to get here and were clearly not unintelligent people, read the room with commendable speed and made the correct decision, which was to stop. Goku looked at them. The Hulk looked at them. The scanner, Vegeta's voice came from directly behind the scouts, because Vegeta had not used instant transmission but had simply moved fast enough that the difference was academic, is still transmitting. He reached past the scout holding it and crushed it in one hand cleanly, without aggression, with the specific precision of someone removing a tooth rather than breaking a jaw. "Tell whoever sent you," Vegeta said, in a voice that operated below the register of threat and above the register of advice, that the next team will not have a conversation. They left quickly. The debrief happened in the strategy room at 4 in the morning, with everyone slightly underdressed, and coffee that Bulma had made with the focused intensity she brought to problems that required both caffeine and clarity. The scanner fragment had been partially reconstructed, enough to identify the transmission frequency, enough to confirm the Planet Trade Organization routing. Frieza was no longer in the assessment phase. He moved faster than expected, Bulma said, which for her was the specific version of concerned that sounded like analytical. He moved faster because we've been training openly, Piccolo said. He's read the escalation. He knows we're building towards something and he wants to disrupt it before the something is built. Or, Vegeta said, looking at the transmission frequency data with his jaw set, he has already collected what he needed. The scanner was live for 40 seconds before I destroyed it. 40 seconds of real-time data on the Hulk's response pattern, power output, and defensive capacity. A pause. He didn't send those scouts to capture anyone. He sent them to get the Hulk angry enough to demonstrate. The room absorbed this. The Hulk, sitting at the table with a coffee mug that looked like a thimble in his hand, had been quiet throughout the debrief. He was doing the thing Banner did when he was present and thinking. The stillness that was not the Hulk's stillness, more internal, more precise. "He wants to know the ceiling," the Hulk said. "Yes," Vegeta said. "He will keep pushing until he finds it." "Yes." The Hulk set down the mug. "Then we need to find it first." Silence. "What?" Krillin said. "If Frieza is looking for the ceiling," the Hulk said, with the measured logic of a physicist approaching a problem from its most useful angle, and in that sentence the voice had shifted slightly. The rhythm was different, the vocabulary more clinical, and everyone in the room registered the shift without addressing it directly. "Then the ceiling is a vulnerability. If we find it first, we control the information. If he finds it first, he controls the approach." A pause, then, in the same voice. "Banner agrees. This is the correct strategy." It was the first time Bruce Banner had spoken. Not emerged, not taken over but spoken through, using the Hulk's voice and the Hulk's presence as a platform in the way that two people who have learned to share a space communicate across the threshold of it. Goku looked at the Hulk with an expression that was soft in a way that was unusual for him and entirely genuine. "Hey, Banner, good to have you in the room." A pause. "It's complicated," the Hulk said, but the rhythm was still Banner's, careful and dry. "But thank you." "Is there a ceiling?" Bulma asked, leaning forward, the scientist fully engaged now. "Theoretically." The Hulk and Banner were quiet for a moment that contained a conversation happening below the audible threshold. "Theoretically," the Hulk said back in his own register, "there is a state beyond anger. Banner calls it the Worldbreaker event. It happened once, on our world, when Banner was a pause that waited the past tense. When things were very bad, when everyone was gone, when there was nothing left except the grief and the anger together, and the grief was bigger than the anger, and the anger fed on the grief until there was no difference." The room was very still. "The Worldbreaker event," Piccolo said carefully. "What did it do?" "Tectonic damage across 3 continental plates," the Hulk said. "Atmospheric disruption measurable from orbit. Power output that Banner estimates from the geological record was sufficient to destroy a small moon." "From grief," Goku said. "From grief that became rage," the Hulk said. "The difference matters. Pure anger has a ceiling because anger wants a target, it focuses, it peaks. Grief that becomes rage doesn't focus, it spreads, it wants everything." He looked at his hands. "Hulk does not go there willingly. Banner does not let Hulk go there willingly. It is the one thing we both agree on completely." "Because of the damage," Piccolo said. "Because," the Hulk said, and the voice was layered again, both of them present in the same words. "There is no version of that state that ends without cost, and the cost is paid by people who did not choose to be near us." The morning came gray and heavy, clouds moving in from the west with the specific quality of weather that knew it was setting a scene. Bulma had spent the pre-dawn hours working on a contingency she'd been developing since day one of the training, something she hadn't mentioned yet because it wasn't finished, and she didn't talk about things that weren't finished unless the timeline forced her hand. The timeline forced her hand at 7 a.m. when her outer system sensors detected a fleet signature at the edge of the solar system. Not scouts, a fleet, 8 vessels minimum, likely more, positioned in a holding pattern that matched Planet Trade Organization tactical doctrine for planetary acquisition operations. Far enough out to be deniable, close enough to move fast. She called everyone in. "He's committed," she said, pulling up the fleet display. "This isn't a retrieval operation. This is a demonstration of force with a retrieval objective." She looked around the room. "He's going to make a move that forces a choice. Either the Hulk comes voluntarily to avoid the planet taking damage, or the planet takes damage to make the Hulk angry enough to be useful." "He would attack the planet to make Hulk angry," the Hulk said, and his voice was flat and cold in a way that was different from all the previous versions of his voice. Not the Worldbreaker threshold, not grief rage, something more controlled and more dangerous, the anger of someone who has done this calculation before and found the same answer every time. "Yes," Vegeta said, he has, for much smaller stakes than this." The Hulk stood up from the table. The coffee mug fell over. Nobody reached for it. He walked to the window and looked at the gray sky and the city below it, and the people in it going about their morning in the way that cities do when they don't know that something is sitting at the edge of their solar system, deciding whether to use them as leverage. "This is what always happens," the Hulk said quietly. Hulk arrives somewhere, tries to be. He stopped. The word he was looking for was not a word he used often because it described something that had been taken from him so many times that using the word felt like tempting a repetition. He found it anyway. Still. Tries to be still. And something always finds Hulk and uses the people near Hulk, and Hulk has to choose between the stillness and the protection. And you always choose protection, Krillin said from across the room. Yes, the Hulk said. That's not a weakness, Krillin said. That's just who you are. The Hulk turned from the window and looked at Krillin, the small, bald human who had been sitting in chairs at the edge of impossible events since this began, offering coffee and honest observations with the same steady energy, asking nothing, assuming nothing. Small man, the Hulk said, and his voice had something in it. What is your name? Krillin. Krillin was not afraid when Hulk arrived. Oh, I was definitely afraid, Krillin said. I spilled my coffee, but being afraid doesn't mean you treat someone badly. He shrugged with the ease of a man who had been afraid so many times it had become a familiar companion. You figure out the fear, and then you figure out the person. The Hulk was quiet for a long moment. Banner likes you, the Hulk said finally. Good, Krillin said. I like Banner. Goku, who had been watching this exchange with the specific emotional attentiveness he deployed when something important was happening that didn't involve fighting, made a decision. He stood up and put his hands in his pockets and looked at the Hulk with the directness that was his most consistent quality across every situation. We're not going to let him use Earth, Goku said. That's settled. What we need to figure out is how we fight 8 ships and Frieza himself, because he'll come personally. He always comes personally when it's something he wants this badly. He looked at Vegeta. Right. He will come personally, Vegeta confirmed. He will want to be present when the Hulk is acquired. He will want to be the one who demonstrates that he can control something that nothing else could control. A pause. It is the specific vanity that has killed him twice, and that he has never been able to excise because it is structural to who he is. Then we use it, Bulma said, pulling up a new display. Everyone looked at her. She had the expression she got when she had been working on something, and it had resolved into something better than she'd expected. The scientist's version of satisfaction, which looked from the outside like barely contained energy in a human-shaped container. I have been building something since day one, she said, based on the scan data from the Hulk's cellular structure, based on how his gamma radiation interacts with Kai, based on the adaptive response pattern Vegeta identified. She pulled up the schematic. It's not a weapon, it's an amplifier, a field generator that takes the Hulk's ambient gamma output and restructures it into a Kai-compatible resonance frequency. Silence. What does that do? Goku asked. In theory, Bulma said, it means that when Frieza pushes the Hulk and the Hulk gets angrier and the Hulk gets stronger, the increase doesn't dissipate into random destruction. It gets channeled, focused. It becomes usable in the same way Kai is usable. She looked at the Hulk. It means the angrier you get, she said, the more precisely you can aim it. The Hulk stared at the schematic for a long moment. How long to build, he said. I started 3 days ago, Bulma said. I need 14 more hours. And Frieza's fleet, Piccolo said. Holding pattern at the outer system, Bulma said. Based on planet trade tactical doctrine, they'll maintain position for 24 to 48 hours before the first move. They want us to know they're there. They want the psychological pressure to build. She looked at Vegeta. Right. He is patient, Vegeta said, but not infinitely. 48 hours is optimistic. I would estimate 36. Then I have time, Bulma said, and she was already moving toward her lab. Barely, Vegeta said. I work well under barely, Bulma said without looking back. Goku watched her go, and then turned to the room with the expression he wore when the shape of something had become clear enough to move toward. Okay, he said, so we have a plan. We have the beginning of a plan, Piccolo said. That's what I said, Goku said. Outside, the clouds had thickened, and the first rain was beginning to fall on West City, and the people in the streets moved through it with their umbrellas and their daily routines, unaware that at the edge of their solar system, a golden tyrant was sitting on a throne on a flagship vessel, looking at a data report with a small smile and a moving tail. Or that in the building at the city's center, a green giant was standing at a window watching the rain with the careful stillness of someone making a decision that was not about anger at all. It was about the city below him, the people in it, the small bald man with the thermos and the honest eyes, the prince who knew what it was to be used and had become something else through enormous painful effort, the scientist who had started building an amplifier the day she met him because she had looked at the data and made a choice about what kind of person she was going to be toward him, the man in the orange gi who had asked if he was okay before anything else. Banner in the interior thought about New York and Sakar and every place that had become a crater because something had found him there and used the people near him. He thought about the specific weight of being a disaster that loved things. And then he thought about Krillin's voice saying that's just who you are, like it was a foundation instead of a fault line. The rain came harder. The Hulk's reflection in the window looked back at him. For the first time since the crater, neither of them looked away. The fleet moved at hour 31. Not all of it. Frieza was too precise for that. He sent 3 ships first, peeling away from the holding formation at the outer system and beginning their approach vector toward Earth with the unhurried deliberateness of a statement rather than an attack. A paragraph before the sentence. A demonstration that the timeline was his and the choice of how it accelerated belonged to him. Bulma's sensors caught the movement at hour 31 and 14 seconds. She had 13 hours left on the amplifier. He's early, Krillin said, looking at the display. He's impatient, Vegeta said. He waited longer than I expected. The holding pattern was already costing him something. His eyes moved across the tactical display with the reading speed of someone who had grown up understanding fleet movements as a native language. 3 advanced ships, not an attack formation, a provocation formation. He wants a response that tells him something. What kind of response? Goku asked. Any response, Vegeta said. Movement, preparation, emotional reaction from the Hulk if his sensors are sensitive enough. He looked at the Hulk, who was standing at the display with his arms at his sides and his face doing the controlled stillness that had become more natural over the past 4 days. He wants to see if the psychological pressure is working. If we come out swinging at 3 ships, he knows we're reactive. If we hold, he knows we have a plan. So we show him neither, Piccolo said. Correct. Show him normal, the Hulk said. Everyone looked at him. Frieza expects chaos, the Hulk said, with the specific battlefield logic that Banner had distilled through years of necessity and the Hulk had refined through years of practice. Expects defensive scramble, expects anger. Show him people who are not afraid, people who are going about their day. He looked at Goku. You said Frieza's vanity is structural. Vanity needs an audience. Give him no audience. Vegeta stared at the Hulk for a moment. "That," Vegeta said, with the careful deliberateness of someone giving credit at personal cost, "is correct." Goku beamed. "Great, so who wants breakfast?" The next 9 hours were the most carefully performed ordinary morning in Capsule Corporation history. Goku trained with Vegeta in the Eastern Compound standard session, controlled power levels, nothing that would read on long-range sensors as combat preparation. Krillin took a walk through West City and came back with groceries and the specific citizen energy of someone who had not noticed the 3 ships entering the inner system and was not concerned about them. Piccolo meditated on the roof, which was normal for Piccolo, and communicated nothing useful to anyone watching. The Hulk sat in the compound garden. He had found a corner of it, behind a growth of engineered bamboo that Bulma had installed for aesthetic reasons, and that now served as reasonable visual cover. And he sat cross-legged in the morning light with his eyes half closed and his hands open on his knees, and performed the specific difficult act of being visibly calm. It required more effort than the training had. Banner was helping. He understood stillness better than the Hulk did, had spent years learning meditation practices, had mapped his own nervous system with the thoroughness of a man whose survival depended on knowing exactly which inputs produced which outputs. He was present and active in a way that was different from the passive presence of the past few days, actively working the interior landscape, keeping the deeper layers from reading the fleet data and escalating. They were both aware that this was temporary. Frieza would make a move that required a response. The question was when and what. The answer arrived at hour 39. 11 hours into the 3-ship approach and 2 hours before Bulma's completion estimate, and it did not come from the ships. It came from West City itself. The embedded agent, not Carmen, whose cover was fully burned. Someone deeper, someone who had been in position longer, someone who had been placed months ago against exactly this contingency, because Frieza planned across timeframes that most people didn't consider realistic. The agent had been watching the compound since the Hulk's arrival, collecting data, waiting for the moment when their specific contribution would be most useful. That moment, Frieza had apparently decided, was now. The explosion happened at a district market 6 blocks from Capsule Corporation. Not a large explosion, not an indiscriminate attack on civilians. Frieza was too precise and too aware of the optics for that. A targeted, controlled detonation of a specific building, timed to maximize structural collapse without maximizing casualties, because the goal was not destruction. The goal was the sound. The goal was what happened to the Hulk when he heard it. Bulma's sensors caught the explosion's signature at the same moment the sound reached the compound. She was in her lab with her hands inside the amplifier housing and her focus on the final calibration sequence, and she heard the distant concussion and looked at her secondary monitor and saw the energy spike from the compound garden that told her the Hulk had heard it too. "No," she said, very quietly, and kept her hands exactly where they were and kept working. The Hulk was on his feet before the sound finished reaching him. The interior landscape went from managed to turbulent in the span of a single breath. The controlled work that Banner had been doing, the careful maintenance of the lower threshold, shuddered under the impact of a very specific input. The sound of a building falling, people in it, people who had nothing to do with fleets or tyrants or dimensional travelers, people who were at a market buying ordinary things on an ordinary morning. His hands came up. His jaw set. The gamma output from his skin spiked so fast that Bulma's compound sensors went to maximum reading in under 2 seconds. Goku was beside him in an instant transmission from across the compound, hand on the Hulk's arm, not restraining, just present. "I got it," Goku said. "Krillin is all ready." "People are in there," the Hulk said, and his voice had dropped an octave, and the air around him was doing the thing it did when the deeper layers were close to the surface. "Krillin and 18 are on site. They're pulling people out right now," Goku said, with the calm authority of someone who has managed crisis communication under exponentially worse conditions. "Nobody is dying. I can feel their Kai. They're scared and some of them are hurt, but nobody is dying." The Hulk's hands were still raised. The gamma output held at its elevated level. Didn't climb further. It was the hardest thing either of them had done in 4 days of training, Banner working from inside and the Hulk holding from outside. The two of them pressing against the same threshold from different directions with everything they had. "He did this to make Hulk angry," the Hulk said. "Yes," Goku said. "So Hulk would stop being still." "Yes." The Hulk looked at the smoke rising above the roofline 6 blocks away, looked at it for a long time. The gamma output stayed elevated, didn't climb. "Banner says," the Hulk said, with the layered voice that meant both of them were speaking, "that giving someone what they want is not the same as being weak." "Banner's right," Goku said. "Hulk disagrees," the Hulk said, "but Banner is right." He lowered his hands. The gamma output began slowly to descend. From the 3 approach ships, sensors recorded an energy spike of extraordinary magnitude followed by a controlled descent that should not have been possible for a power profile of that type. The data was transmitted immediately to the flagship. Frieza looked at it for a long time. His tail was still. That was the tell, the one his aides had learned to read over centuries of service. When the tail moved, Frieza was engaged, interested, playing the long game. When the tail was still, he had moved past interest into something colder. "He controlled it," Frieza said. "My lord," the readings suggest. "He controlled it," Frieza repeated. "The spike was genuine. The descent was chosen." He stood from his throne for the first time in 9 hours, moving with the liquid precision that was his particular form of physical statement. That changes the approach. He walked to the command display and looked at Earth's blue surface and the small green dot that his sensors could now track as a distinct energy signature anywhere on the planet. "If he can choose not to escalate," Frieza said softly, "then the weapon I wanted does not exist." He was quiet for a moment. "What exists instead is something more interesting and considerably more threatening." He turned to his commander. "Full fleet, begin approach. I will go down personally." "My lord, the Galactic Patrol protocols for inhabited." "Are not my protocols," Frieza said pleasantly. "Move the fleet." Bulma finished the amplifier at hour 41. She came out of the lab with her hair held together by a stylus she'd forgotten, was in it, and grease on her hands, and the expression of someone who had done something she was proud of, and was going to allow herself approximately 90 seconds of satisfaction before moving to the next problem. She held up the device. It was smaller than expected, a cylindrical housing roughly the size of a thermos, covered in emitter nodes and calibration dials, elegant in the way that things are elegant when they've been built by someone who had to solve a genuinely new problem and found the most efficient path through it. "Done," she said. "The fleet is moving," Piccolo said from across the room. "I know," she said. "I can see my own sensors." She looked at the Hulk. "Here's how this works. The field generator creates a resonance layer around you. Your ambient gamma output gets restructured into chi-compatible frequency. When your anger increases, the field amplifies proportionally, and instead of the increase radiating as uncontrolled energy, it feeds back as focused output. She paused. The short version, you get angrier, you hit harder and more accurately instead of just harder. How accurate, the Hulk said. Accurate enough to distinguish between Frieza and the planet he's standing on, Bulma said. Which, given your Worldbreaker threshold, is not a trivial engineering achievement, so I would appreciate appropriate acknowledgement. Hulk acknowledges, the Hulk said. Good, there's one limitation. Bulma's voice shifted register. The field works within a certain bandwidth. If the anger exceeds a specific threshold, the resonance structure breaks down. Above that threshold, the amplifier stops being useful and the energy goes uncontrolled again. She looked at him directly. There's a ceiling on what this can channel. If you go above it, we lose the precision. So the strategy has to account for that. What's the ceiling? Vegeta asked. Roughly equivalent to Super Saiyan Blue output based on my Kai scaling models. She hesitated. If he goes Worldbreaker, the device burns out. Silence. Then Hulk does not go Worldbreaker, the Hulk said simply. Can you guarantee that? Piccolo asked, not accusatory, clinical. The Hulk and Banner were quiet for a moment. No, they said together, but Banner will be forward. Banner maintains the threshold. Hulk provides the output. A pause. We have done harder things. The fleet entered visual range of Earth's atmosphere 40 minutes later. 8 ships in a formation that was not a battle formation and not a diplomatic formation, but something precisely between. The specific arrangement that said we can do either and have not yet decided which, and that ambiguity is a weapon. Frieza's flagship led the approach, a vessel that was architectural in its arrogance, built not just to carry a tyrant but to communicate one, its silhouette alone expressing the specific vocabulary of total dominance that the Planet Trade Organization had spent centuries perfecting. The Z-Fighters were waiting in the upper atmosphere. Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo, Gohan, who had arrived from the city 2 hours ago because Piccolo had called him and Piccolo did not make calls casually, and Krillin, who had absolutely no business being in the upper atmosphere against a fleet and a resurrected emperor, and was there anyway because that was simply who Krillin was. And the Hulk, with Bulma's amplifier housing built into a compression band around his left forearm, floating on a platform of focused Kai that Goku was maintaining at the base of his feet, because the Hulk could not fly, and they had collectively decided that this was not the moment to let that be a liability. The flagship hatch opened. Frieza descended without a ship, without a pod, the way he always made his entrances, because the statement of his power was that the vacuum of space was simply not his problem. He floated in the upper atmosphere in his final form, white and gold, his tail curling with the slow ease of something that has never had a reason to hurry because everything has always, eventually, come to it. He looked at the assembled defenders, and his expression performed boredom with exquisite technique. His eyes found the Hulk. "My goodness," Frieza said pleasantly, "you are precisely as green as the reports suggested." The Hulk looked at Frieza. "Hulk has heard better openings," the Hulk said. Something flickered in Frieza's eyes. That was the compressed version of being amused and insulted simultaneously. "I'll be brief," Frieza said, because he was never brief, but he always said he would be. "Because the math here is quite simple. You are, by any reasonable metric, the most interesting thing to arrive in this sector in some time. I have resources, I have reach. I have the capacity to offer you what you actually want, which is, if I'm reading the profile correctly, a way home and a guarantee that the people on that planet," he gestured downward toward Earth, "remain unharmed." A pause calibrated to feel generous. "Come with me voluntarily and both things happen. Make this unpleasant," and he spread his hands in a gesture of ornate regret. "Well, the math changes." "You blew up a building," the Hulk said. "A structural test," Frieza said. "Everyone survived, I'm told." "You did it to make Hulk angry." "I did it to demonstrate capacity," Frieza said pleasantly. "There's a distinction." "There isn't," the Hulk said. "In any case." "Hulk has heard this offer," the Hulk said, and his voice had the quality it got when both layers were fully present and fully aligned, which happened rarely and which produced a specific register that operated below argument and above threat, in the territory of absolute statement. "From SHIELD, from the World Security Council, from the Illuminati." A pause. "From people who thought they were smarter than the last people who made the same offer." He looked at Frieza with the patient, exhausted gaze of a being who had been someone's solution for a very long time. Always the same, always a room, always a cage, always someone who thinks they are the one who found the right angle. He tilted his head slightly. "Are you the one who found the right angle?" Frieza's tail had stopped moving entirely. "Attack," Frieza said. The fleet opened fire. What followed was not the battle Frieza had designed. He had designed a battle where the Hulk's rage would spike uncontrolled under fire, where the collateral destruction would threaten Earth, where the choice between fighting Frieza and protecting the planet would create the paralysis he needed to make acquisition viable. He had designed it carefully, and it was a good design, built on accurate intelligence and sound tactical logic. He had not designed it for Bulma's amplifier. The first volley hit the Hulk and the gamma output spiked, and the amplifier array lit up, and instead of an uncontrolled energy surge, what came back was a focused burst of restructured gamma chi that hit the nearest ship like a punch that had been converted to a beam, and that understood, with Bulma's engineering and Banner's physics and the Hulk's raw output, exactly where the hull was weakest. The ship lost its primary drive. Frieza stared. Vegeta was already moving through the fleet at Super Saiyan Blue, precise and surgical, targeting engines rather than hulls because a destroyed ship was a tactical achievement, and a disabled ship was a strategic message. And the message he was sending was one he had spent years composing. Goku went for the flagship support vessels, clearing the field, laughing in the way he laughed when a fight was going in a direction he found genuinely exciting. Gohan and Piccolo worked the formation's edges in the coordinated silence of people who had trained together long enough that communication was redundant. Krillin, from a position of impeccable tactical rationality, threw destructo discs at the sensor arrays of every ship that came within range, blinding them efficiently, earning his place in the upper atmosphere with characteristic Krillin methodology. Not the strongest, not the most powerful, but precisely useful in the exact way that was needed. Frieza fought Goku first because Goku was what Frieza always moved toward when things became unplanned, the specific axis of his particular obsession, and they traded exchanges in the upper atmosphere that bent the clouds below them into visible rings. And the Hulk fought the fleet. Not in the way the Hulk usually fought, not the geological fury of something trying to destroy everything within reach. With Banner forward and the amplifier channeling the anger into precision, the Hulk moved through the battle with something that looked from a distance remarkably like what it actually was. A physicist who had spent a lifetime learning how things broke, using a body that could break anything, in a context where the anger was fuel and the intelligence was the engine. Ship after ship went dark, not destroyed, disabled, because Banner understood that destroying 8 ships created debris, and debris fell toward the planet below, and the planet below had people on it, and that consideration threaded through every strike the Hulk made with the consistency of a principle rather than a strategy. Frieza noticed. He broke from Goku with a technique that left a crater in the upper atmosphere and appeared directly in front of the Hulk with the speed of something that had never had to be cautious and had learned caution only when it was too late and then immediately forgotten the lesson. "You're holding back," Frieza said, with the specific outrage of a man whose intelligence has produced accurate data and found it insulting. "Yes," the Hulk said. "The device on your arm, the blue-haired woman's work." Frieza's eyes moved to the amplifier with the focused attention of someone reading a problem they have just understood. "She's limiting you." "She's focusing me," the Hulk said. Frieza's expression shifted, something moving behind the theatrical pleasantness, something older and colder and genuinely operative. "You could level this planet," Frieza said. "The readings suggest." "Hulk knows what Hulk can do," the Hulk said. "Then why?" "Because they're on it," the Hulk said. He gestured downward, the blue curve of the earth below them, visible from this altitude, hanging in the dark with the casual beauty of something that did not know it was worth protecting, and therefore relied on other things to know it for them. Frieza looked at the Hulk for a moment with an expression that was doing something that was not his usual catalog of expressions. Something that was almost recognition of a concept he had encountered before and processed as weakness, and that was presenting itself now in a context that made weakness an inadequate description. Then he powered up to 100%. The energy output hit the upper atmosphere like a second sun, arriving white gold light that cast hard shadows on the cloud cover below, that made Goku stop where he was and measure the signature with his Kai sense, that made Vegeta, mid-combat with a support vessel, pause and look up. It hit the Hulk like a wall. The gamma output spiked. The amplifier lit up in full array for the first time, every emitter node working, Bulma's engineering running at maximum capacity, the resonance field straining to channel what was coming in. Banner was holding the threshold. Just barely. Just enough. The Hulk took the full output of Frieza at 100% and stood in it, and the amplifier screamed with restructured energy. And the focused burst that came back out of it was not the Worldbreaker, but it was something that had no name yet in this universe. Something between Kai and Gamma and grief, and the specific anger of a being that had decided what it was protecting and why. It hit Frieza. Frieza, who had not been hit this way in either of his lifetimes, who had engineered 2 resurrections partly to ensure that he would never again experience the feeling of being genuinely overwhelmed, who had structured his entire existence around the concept of being the thing that hit and not the thing that was hit, flew backward through the upper atmosphere for 200 meters before his body processed what had happened and re-established position. He floated. He looked at his hands. He looked at the Hulk. For the first time in either lifetime, Frieza's expression showed something without intending to. It showed uncertainty. Goku appeared beside the Hulk with the easy speed of instant transmission. His hair was gold, and his expression was the specific one he wore when something had happened that he wanted to examine from every angle. "You okay?" Goku asked. "Amplifier is at 93% capacity," the Hulk said, which was not the answer to the question Goku asked, but was the answer to the question that mattered. "Banner." "Holding," the Hulk said, and the voice was layered again, both present. "We are holding." Frieza had recovered his position and his expression, and was assembling his composure with the visible effort of someone rebuilding a structure under load. Around him, what remained of his fleet's operational capacity was 3 ships with degraded systems, 2 ships fully disabled, and the flagship maintaining position because the flagship's defenses were designed to a different standard. He looked at the assembled defenders, at Vegeta, who had used this pause to arrive at Goku's side with Super Saiyan Blue still running, and an expression that communicated a complete paragraph without words, at Piccolo and Gohan holding position, at Krillin, who was bleeding slightly from a graze and was still exactly where he'd chosen to be, at the Hulk. "You won't always have the device," Frieza said. "Hulk won't always need it," the Hulk said. Frieza's gaze moved to Vegeta. Something passed between them in that look that was not the look of enemies, exactly, which would have been cleaner, but the look of 2 people who had a history that included categories of damage that neither of them had fully processed and probably never would, and that had to be acknowledged silently because there was no version of addressing it aloud that served either of them in this moment. Vegeta held the look. Frieza looked away first. It was small, barely visible, but it was the first time in the history of their particular relationship that Frieza had been the one to look away, and everyone present registered it with the instinct of people who understood what it meant. "This isn't finished," Frieza said. "It never is with you," Vegeta said. Frieza looked at the Earth below, the blue planet with its impossible density of significance per square kilometer, with its green giant who could have broken it and hadn't, with its collection of people who kept finding new ways to be inconvenient. His tail moved. Just once. Then he turned and moved toward the flagship and the fleet. What remained of it began its withdrawal with the specific unhurried pace of a retreat that is insisting it is not a retreat. Goku watched them go. "He'll come back," Goku said. "Yes," the Hulk said. "Better than last time though," Goku said, with the particular optimism of a man who had always believed in next time as a concept. "Yes," the Hulk said. And then, after a pause that contained a conversation between 2 people who shared one body and had just shared one battle, "Yes." Below them, the Earth turned, indifferent and irreplaceable, catching the morning light along its eastern edge the way it had every morning for 4 billion years, reliable as a principle, beautiful as a fact. The Hulk looked at it for a long time. Banner looked at it with him. Neither of them looked away. The wreckage assessment took 3 days. Not physical wreckage, mostly. The upper atmosphere battle had produced surprisingly contained damage given what had been involved, a testament partly to Bulma's amplifier and partly to the specific discipline that Banner had maintained throughout, threading the Hulk's output through precision rather than scale. 2 disabled ships had entered a stable decaying orbit that the Galactic Patrol retrieved within 18 hours, filing 17 forms about the incident that Bulma reviewed and annotated with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the paperwork of impossible events was its own kind of protection. The Market District explosion had caused structural damage to 4 buildings, injured 11 people, none critically, and produced a crater in the street that West City's infrastructure department had already scheduled for repair with the institutional efficiency of a city that had stopped asking why and started asking when. The wreckage that took 3 days was the other kind. The kind that existed in rooms and conversations, and the specific silences that settle after something large has passed through and left the air different. Bulma spent day 1 in her lab running post-operation diagnostics on the amplifier, which had come through at 87% functional and needed recalibration in 3 of its emitter nodes. She worked with the door open, which was unusual for her when she was in technical mode, and if anyone had asked why, she would have said ventilation and meant something else entirely. The Hulk sat outside the lab door for most of day 1, not waiting for anything specific, not performing a function, simply present in the way that beings who have spent a long time without a safe place to be present sometimes occupy a space they've identified as safe, carefully. The way you'd place something fragile, not trusting it entirely yet but choosing to try. Bulma talked at him while she worked. Not at him, to him, about the emitter node tolerances and the frequency calibration and the interesting interaction between gamma radiation and Kai that she was going to need at least 6 more months to fully understand. And the Hulk listened and occasionally asked questions that were Banner's questions, precise and technical, and she answered them with the automatic respect she gave anyone who asked real questions about real things. By the afternoon of day 1, the door was fully open, and the Hulk was sitting inside the lab, and Bulma had pulled up a secondary display for him showing the real-time cellular scan data she'd been collecting since his arrival, and they were having a conversation about the physics of anger that was also, underneath the physics, a different conversation. The kind that happens when 2 very intelligent people find the most comfortable language they share, and use it to say the things that don't have direct vocabulary. The adaptive response at the cellular level, Bulma said, pointing to a graph, isn't just physical. Look at the spike timing. The physical reinforcement happens a measurable fraction of a second after the emotional input, not simultaneously. Meaning the emotion causes the physical change, the Hulk said, with Banner's precision. Meaning the emotion is the mechanism, Bulma said, not a side effect, not a trigger for a separate process. The anger is literally the biology changing. They're the same event. She looked at the graph. That's extraordinary. In Kai-based power systems, emotion influences output, but the biology is mostly stable. Your biology and your emotional state are the same system. Banner has known this, the Hulk said. It is why control was always the wrong word. What's the right word? The Hulk was quiet for a moment. Integration, he said. Bulma looked at the scan data for a long time. Yeah, she said softly, that tracks. Vegeta sparred alone on day 1, which was normal, and on the afternoon of day 2, he went looking for the Hulk, which was less normal and which he explained to no one including himself. He found the Hulk in the eastern garden, in the corner behind the bamboo that had become his default position when he wanted to be outside without being observed. Vegeta stood at the garden's edge for a moment, and then walked in and sat on a stone bench a few meters away with his arms crossed, and his posture performing the specific variety of not seeking conversation, that is a form of seeking conversation. They sat in silence for a while. The battle analysis, Vegeta said eventually. Yes, the Hulk said. Your control during the fleet engagement, the precision on the hull strikes. Vegeta paused. That was not the amplifier. The amplifier helped, the Hulk said. The amplifier channeled what was already there, Vegeta said. The precision was yours, Banner's. He was quiet for a moment. Most fighters at that power level do not distinguish between defeating an enemy and destroying their ship. The distinction requires something beyond combat instinct. "People fall when ships fall," the Hulk said simply. "Yes," Vegeta looked at the bamboo. "When I fought at that level, early in my life, I did not make that distinction. I did not see the people in the ships as variables worth considering." The Hulk looked at him. "And now," the Hulk asked. Vegeta was quiet with the question for a moment, holding it at the specific angle that honest questions require when you've spent time with dishonest answers. "Now," Vegeta said, "I see them first, before the tactical assessment. The people first." He paused. "It took a long time, and specific people who were very stubborn about treating me as if I was already who I was going to become rather than who I had been." The Hulk absorbed this. "Kakarot," the Hulk said, "not a question." Vegeta's jaw shifted, "Among others." "Bulma," the Hulk said. The jaw shift again, more pronounced, carrying the specific freight of a man who had received something enormous and was still in the ongoing process of understanding its scale. "Yes." "Krillin," the Hulk said. Vegeta looked at him with an expression that was the compressed version of several emotions, arriving simultaneously, in an uncomfortable order. "Don't push it," Vegeta said. The Hulk's face did the thing it had done in the kitchen on the first day, the compressed leading edge of a smile, and this time it didn't disappear before it fully formed. Vegeta saw it. He looked away at the bamboo again and said nothing, but something in his posture, almost imperceptible, shifted from performing not seeking conversation to simply being in a garden with someone. They sat there for another hour. Nobody talked much. It was, in the taxonomy of things that happened in that garden, one of the better hours. The formal acknowledgement came on day 3. Which was faster than these things usually moved in a universe with this much bureaucratic infrastructure, but which reflected the specific velocity at which consensus forms when a battle has happened in visible range of every sensor array on a planet. And the people involved are the people who always end up involved. Goku had made calls. This was Goku's particular institutional skill, the one that compensated for all the ways he was not a traditional leader. He could not sit through a planning meeting without fidgeting. He could not reliably remember political protocols. He processed paperwork as a near-physical threat. But he could call people, and when he called people, he had the specific quality of voice and intention that made them understand that the call was not a formality, but a genuine reaching out from one person to another. And that quality was not learnable and not replicable. And it worked on an embarrassingly wide range of beings across an embarrassingly wide range of circumstances. He had called the Galactic Patrol. He had called King Kai, who had called the Supreme Kai, who had filed the relevant dimensional traveler documentation with a note attached that Goku had dictated, and that read, in its entirety, "He's good people, please be normal to him." The Supreme Kai had read this note with the expression of someone who had received communications from Goku before and had learned to translate. He had called Beerus. That call had been longer. The meeting happened in the Capsule Corporation strategy room because Bulma had decided that if things were going to be formalized, they were going to be formalized somewhere with adequate seating and good coffee, and she had prepared for it with the comprehensive efficiency of a woman who had hosted gods before and understood that the catering needed to be taken seriously. Beerus arrived with Whis, which was how Beerus always arrived, and sat at the head of the table with the proprietorial ease of a being for whom any surface he chose to sit at became his table by definition. He looked at the Hulk for a long time with the golden eyes that had been performing threat assessments on beings across 4 billion years of professional practice. The Hulk looked back. "You controlled it," Beerus said, not a greeting, a statement with a question inside it. "We controlled it," the Hulk said. Beerus's eyes narrowed slightly at the "we," processing the implication. Whis, standing at Beerus's shoulder, smiled his particular smile. "I wanted to see what made you angry," Beerus said, with the directness that gods deploy when they've decided honesty is more efficient than diplomacy. "I was going to let Frieza's approach run further before intervening." A pause. "I was curious about the ceiling." "You were watching," the Hulk said. "I am always watching," Beerus said. "That is rather the point of my position." He picked up a piece of cake from the tray Bulma had placed in the center of the table, examined it, and ate it with the focused appreciation of a being for whom food was a genuine priority. "You did not reach the ceiling." "No," the Hulk said. "Could you have?" The room was very still. "Yes," the Hulk said. "But you chose not to." "Yes." Beerus was quiet for a moment, eating his cake with the unhurried deliberateness of someone for whom time had long ago stopped being a pressure. "In 4 billion years," Beerus said, "I have encountered 3 categories of powerful beings: those who have power and cannot control it, those who have power and control it perfectly, and those who have power and choose continuously and with effort to control it even though they could stop choosing at any moment." He set down his fork. "The first category is a problem. The second category is a tool. The third category is—" He paused, and the pause had weight. "Interesting." He looked at the Hulk with something that was, in the vocabulary of gods of destruction, the highest form of regard. "You are the third category," Beerus said. The Hulk received this without visible reaction, but something in the room's air changed slightly, the way pressure changes when something that has been held against something else is allowed to rest. "What does that mean?" the Hulk said practically. "It means," Whis said smoothly and warmly, "that you are welcome in this universe. Formally, with the relevant divine acknowledgement, which carries rather more institutional weight than the galactic patrol forms, I'm afraid." Bulma made a sound that she converted into a cough, but which was definitely not a cough. Goku beamed. Vegeta, arms crossed, expression neutral, said nothing, which was the version of Vegeta saying everything. Piccolo nodded once slowly from the corner. Krillin, sitting at the table with his coffee, looked at the Hulk and raised his mug slightly. The Hulk looked at Krillin, then at the assembled faces of the people who had fed him and sparred with him and argued in front of him, and built him an amplifier and sat in gardens with him and fought beside him in the upper atmosphere, and had at no point, in 5 days of impossible circumstances, reached for a cage. Banner in the interior felt something that arrived quietly and without announcement, the way things arrive when they've been traveling a long time toward a place they weren't sure would exist. He felt, specifically and accurately, that he was somewhere he was allowed to be. The transition did not have a dramatic moment. No flash of light, no announcement. It happened in the garden on the afternoon of day 4, when the Hulk was sitting in his corner behind the bamboo and the interior was very quiet, and the quality of the quiet shifted in a way that had happened before, but not here, not in this universe, not in this specific accumulated context of safety. Banner came forward, not the Hulk stepping back, an integration. Both present, the balance shifted slightly toward the man, the green remaining but the frame slightly less massive, the face carrying the specific exhausted intelligence that the Hulk's face held in different proportion. Bruce Banner sat in the garden and looked at his hands. They were green still. They were large. They were the hands that had broken things and built things and been instruments of other people's designs and been, eventually, through enormous effort and specific stubborn people, his own. Bulma came into the garden 20 minutes later with 2 mugs, the way she had apparently decided was going to be her approach to this development, which was not to make it a development, but to make it a Tuesday. She sat beside him and handed him a mug. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Bruce said. His voice was different from the Hulk's, quieter. The precision of it more surface level, more habitual. The physicist's verbal discipline that had always been partly a way of managing the proximity of the other thing. "How are you doing?" Bulma said, not as a formality. Bruce looked at the garden, at the bamboo and the engineered wildness and the morning light coming through it. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "Ask me in a few days." "Okay," Bulma said, and drank her coffee and did not press, which was exactly right. "The amplifier," Bruce said after a while, "the resonance architecture, the way you structured the gamma-chi frequency conversion." He paused. "It's the most elegant applied physics I've seen in either universe." Bulma looked at him over her mug, with the specific expression she wore when someone said something that landed exactly where it was aimed. "I know," she said. Bruce laughed. It was a small laugh, quiet and a little rusty with disuse, the laugh of a man who had forgotten he could make that sound and was surprised to find it still worked. But it was real, uncomplicated by anything, just a moment of genuine amusement in a garden on a morning that was simply a morning. The question of going home had to be addressed eventually, and it was Goku who addressed it, because Goku had the gift of asking the difficult questions in ways that made them feel like natural conversation rather than examinations. They were eating lunch, all of them, at the long table that Bulma had set up in the compound's open area, because the kitchen was no longer large enough for the social configuration that had developed around it. Goku asked between bites, with the direct simplicity that was his most consistent quality. "Do you want to go home?" Bruce and the Hulk, integrated and present, were quiet for a moment. "I don't know if I can," Bruce said. The dimensional breach was uncontrolled. Bulma's been working on a tracking model for the fracture signature, but the variables are. "That's not what I asked," Goku said. Bruce looked at him. "Do you want to?" Goku said. The table was quiet, not uncomfortably. The way tables go quiet when a real question has been asked and the real answer deserves real space. "There are people there," Bruce said carefully. "People who," he paused, "relationships that are complicated, responsibilities, a world that I damaged in ways that I'm still," he stopped again. The word he was looking for was not the right word. The right word was bigger and more unwieldy. "Accountable for," he said finally. "But," Goku said, with the gentleness of someone who had heard the "but" before the sentence finished. "But I don't know what going back means anymore," Bruce said. "Banner and the Hulk have been at war, then at truce, then at something that didn't have a name, and here," he looked at his hands again, "here we are something else, something we haven't been before, and I don't know if we can maintain that there, in that context, with those histories." Piccolo spoke from the end of the table. "The integration isn't a place," Piccolo said. "It doesn't exist in one universe and not another. It's not the garden, it's not the amplifier, it's not us. He paused. It's you, both of you, wherever you are. Bruce looked at Piccolo, the tall green man who had sat down in the lab on the first day, without fanfare or explanation, who had recognized something in a single word and chosen proximity, who had fought beside them in the upper atmosphere with the calm precision of someone who had spent decades becoming what he chose to be. You sound like you know, Bruce said. I know something adjacent to it, Piccolo said, close enough to have an opinion. The opinion being that you can go back, Piccolo said, and you can come back. Those are not mutually exclusive. This universe is not a one-time offer. The table absorbed this. Krillin, who had been listening with the attentiveness he brought to everything that mattered, raised his mug. For what it's worth, Krillin said, from the guy who spilled his coffee when you landed. He looked at Bruce. You're welcome here, both of you, whenever, as long as you need. Bruce looked at Krillin for a long moment. Banner likes you, the Hulk said from somewhere inside. I know, Krillin said, grinning. You told me. The decision, when it arrived, was not dramatic. It came 3 days later, quietly, in the way that real decisions come after the noise has settled and the shape of things becomes clear. Bruce would stay, for now. Not forever, not necessarily, but for now, which was the only category of time that had ever been honest for him. Bulma was working on the fracture signature tracking model, and there was real science to do, and he was, underneath everything else, still a scientist. The Galactic Patrol forms had been filed with Beerus's divine endorsement attached, and Whis had added a note of his own that had made the Supreme Kai sit down briefly before processing it. He trained with Goku on the mornings when the weather was good, which was most mornings. Not the everything held back escalation of the first 4 days, but something more sustainable. The kind of training that was less about finding ceilings and more about understanding architecture. How 2 entirely different power systems could operate in proximity, and what each could learn from the other. Goku learned that power without a ceiling is not automatically stronger than power with one. That the interesting question is always about control and intention rather than output. The Hulk learned that Kai was not just energy, but philosophy made physical. That what you were when you were calm was as important as what you became when you were tested. Vegeta did not officially join these sessions. He showed up anyway, observed from a distance, and on the 3rd week threw himself into an exchange with the Hulk that lasted 40 minutes and ended with both of them sitting in a crater looking at the sky with the specific mutual satisfaction of people who have found a worthy difficulty in each other. He did not describe this to anyone. Everyone knew about it within the hour. Piccolo and Bruce had conversations in the evenings sometimes, in the garden or on the roof. The kind of conversations that happen between people who have processed their respective complications to a point where direct discussion is possible without the interference of ongoing crisis. They talked about integration, about what it cost and what it gave, about the specific experience of being more than one thing at once, and the universe's general discomfort with that. They never resolved the conversations. Resolution was not the point of them. Krillin came by the compound twice a week, usually with food that Kai had sent, because Kai had been told about the situation by Goku in the specific garbled way that Goku relayed information, and had responded in the specific way. Kai responded to the information that someone needed feeding, which was by immediately starting to cook. He and Bruce played board games that Bulma produced from a capsule storage unit. Games that Bruce had not played since a version of his life that felt like a different person's biography. And Krillin was genuinely terrible at them, and genuinely funny about being terrible. And Bruce found himself laughing that quiet, rusty laugh with increasing frequency. One evening, 4 weeks after the crater, Bruce Banner sat in the garden alone in the last of the daylight and thought about his other world. About Tony's lab and the particular smell of the workshop, machine oil and ozone and bad coffee. About Natasha's specific silence in the elevator that was different from all other silences. About the complicated weight of what he owed to a world that was frightened of him, and that he had frightened repeatedly, and that he had also, in the ways available to him, tried to protect. He owed them something. He would go back eventually. The fracture tracking model was 6 weeks from completion, and when it was done, the path would be there if he chose it. He was choosing to be here until then. The Hulk was quiet and present in the way he'd been since the garden on day 4, neither forward nor absent, inhabiting the integration the way you inhabit something you've stopped testing for safety, because the evidence is sufficient. The sky above the garden was doing its evening thing, the specific Dragon Ball universe sky that was a slightly different shade of blue than the sky of his world, and that had, over 4 weeks, stopped feeling foreign and started feeling like a sky he knew. A sky he would remember. He stayed until the stars came out. There were more of them here than at home, or arranged differently, the specific alien beauty of a sky that belonged to a different cosmology, and Bruce Banner, physicist, looked at them with the attention he gave to things that were both scientifically interesting and simply beautiful, the two categories overlapping comfortably the way they did when you were not in crisis. The Hulk looked with him, both of them quiet, both of them here. Far above, at the edge of the system where Frieza's fleet had retreated to its own space, and the galactic patrol ships had returned to their roots, the universe continued its ordinary operations. Planets in their orbits, light in its travel, the enormous, indifferent machinery of existence running at its usual scale. And somewhere in that machinery, a new data point existed that had not existed 5 weeks ago. A note filed in the cosmic registry by a divine hand, in a category that had fewer entries than any other. The note read, Earth, Universe 7, New Defender, Classification Integrated, Threat Level Conditional, Nature Choosing. That last word had been added by Whis, with the small, precise handwriting he used when something mattered enough to be exact. Choosing. Because that was the thing. Not the power, not the ceiling, not the gamma radiation or the Chi compatibility or the amplifier's elegant resonance architecture. The thing that had changed the battle and changed the weeks after it and changed 2 people who had been at war with themselves for longer than anyone had required them to be, was not a what. It was a practice. Continuous, effortful, renewable. The choice, made again in every moment that tested it, to be the thing that protected rather than the thing that destroyed. To be here, fully and on purpose. Both of them. Bruce Banner arrived in a crater and left it different from how he'd arrived. Not changed in the sudden dramatic way that the word transformation usually implies, nothing that happened in a flash of light or a moment of revelation. Changed the way things change when time and safety and the specific stubbornness of good people are applied continuously over weeks. Changed the way water changes stone, which is slowly and completely, and in ways that don't reverse. He came as an anomaly, a dimensional incursion, a power signature that broke scouters and made the god of destruction open both eyes and stay awake. He stayed as something else. The Dragon Ball universe had offered him something his own world had struggled to provide. not because his world lacked the capacity, but because the history was too thick there, too layered with the specific sediment of everything that had gone wrong and everything that had been broken, and all the people who had looked at him and seen a weapon first and a person second, if at all. Here, the history was thin, and the people had looked at him first, before the assessment, before the tactical consideration, with the simple directness of people who had decided, each in their own way, that knowing who someone was mattered more than knowing what they could do. Goku asked if he was okay before anything else. That was the first thing. It remained the most important one. The Hulk had always been powerful. Power was never the question. The question was what the power was for, and in the 5 weeks that had passed since the crater, the answer had shifted from the complicated, angry, grief-soaked answer it had been carrying for so long to something simpler and more stable. It was for the city below them, when they chose not to go Worldbreaker. It was for Krillin, who spilled his coffee and came down anyway. It was for the people in the ships they disabled rather than destroyed. It was for the garden and the bamboo and the evenings and the board games and the laughing that had gotten less rusty. It was for the integration itself, the continuous choosing of it, the daily practice of being two things that had learned to be one thing together. Frieza would return. Nobody in the compound held any illusion about that. He was too structural a presence in this universe, too deeply woven into its threat landscape, to be concluded by a single battle in the upper atmosphere. He had retreated and he had recalculated, and somewhere in a sector of space that didn't appear on galactic patrol charts, he was building a new approach around the data he'd collected, refining his model, looking for the angle he'd missed. He would find that the angle he'd missed was not a tactical one. He'd missed that the ceiling he was looking for was not the Worldbreaker threshold. The ceiling was the choice, and the choice was not a weakness to exploit. It was the architecture of everything that made the Hulk impossible to aim. You cannot weaponize something that has decided what it's for. The fracture tracking model would be finished in 6 weeks, and when it was done, Bruce Banner would stand in front of the data and make a decision that was already mostly made. He would go back. He owed that to his world, to the complicated weight of what he'd broken and what he'd tried to build, and the people he'd left mid-sentence when the portal took him. He would go back and he would carry the integration with him, and he would see if it held in that context, in that history, among those specific people with their specific memories of him. He believed it would. The Hulk believed it would. That shared belief was the most recent and perhaps most significant achievement of their entire complicated history together. And he would come back here. Piccolo had said those things were not mutually exclusive, and Piccolo was right in the way that Piccolo was always right when he chose to speak, with the precision of someone who had earned the words by living them. This universe would be here. These people would be here. Goku, who would be training when he returned and would stop mid-exchange to grin and ask how it went with the uncomplicated, genuine interest of someone for whom the answer actually mattered. Vegeta, who would not stop training and would not acknowledge the return directly, but would show up at the sparring ground the next morning, which was the same thing. Bulma, who would immediately want to discuss the fracture tracking model and the implications for dimensional breach repair methodology, and who would hand him a mug before he'd finished explaining, and who would have already been working on the problem for weeks, because that was simply how she operated. Piccolo, who would nod once. Krillin, who would have coffee. The universe itself would be here, with its different sky and its additional stars and its specific quality of hope, The particular Dragon Ball flavor of it, the stubborn, optimistic insistence that strength and goodness were not incompatible, that the fight was worth having, that the next one would be faced together. Brusa Banner sat in the garden until the stars were fully out. Then he went inside. Both of them, together, choosing